On a whim, I chose to drive down Hollow Creek Road around 3 in the morning, dragging a couple of friends along for the adventure. Our plan was simple: cruise around until we felt that eerie thrill you only get in the dead of night, when the world is unsettlingly silent. But the second we turned onto that road, I realized this was something else entirely. The temperature seemed to drop the moment we passed the last streetlight, and the air felt thick, almost heavy in my lungs. Out of nowhere, a dense fog rolled in. 1 second, we had a clear view of the road ahead, and the next, we were crawling forward, struggling to see more than a few feet past the headlights. It was like we had driven into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. The car fell into a tense silence as the driver eased off the gas. I caught myself gripping the door handle, my pulse racing for reasons I couldn't quite explain. A few minutes in, someone in the back nervously asked if we were sure about this, making me second-guess myself. But we weren't ghost hunters, just a group of night owls looking for a little excitement. Still, the emptiness of the road pressed in on me. It felt like we were being watched, though I couldn't see a single living thing through the thick mist. Then, something caught my eye, a faint shape just beyond our headlights. At first, I thought it was just the fog swirling in a strange pattern. But then the driver muttered a curse under his breath. He saw it too. He slowed the car nearly to a stop, squinting to make sense of the odd outline. It was boxy but unstable, its edges shifting as if struggling to hold a solid form. My nerves spiked, and everything in me screamed to tell him to just drive. But before I could say a word, someone in the back started shouting. Their voice was raw with fear as they pointed at something high in the trees. They insisted they saw a heavy form covered in fur, claws digging into the bark. I barely caught a flicker of movement, maybe just a branch swaying in the wind, but my friend's panic was real. The driver slammed the gas pedal, and we shot forward blindly, desperate to escape. The fog thickened, almost like it was trying to trap us there. The engine roared, voices tangled in shouts and fear, and I was sure we were about to crash. I stole a glance back, half expecting some nightmare creature to be chasing us, but all I saw were streaks of light swallowed by the mist. My chest tightened with pure, raw panic. Somehow, we reached a stretch of road where the fog abruptly lifted. It was jarring to go from suffocating haze to sudden clarity. We sat in stunned silence, catching our breath, but a shared dread filled the car. Did we actually see something, or had our minds played tricks on us? Either way, if what we saw was real, we wanted no part of it. As we got farther away, we finally found our voices again, each of us trying to explain what we'd seen. The driver couldn't shake the image of that strange, shifting shape near the tree. The two in the back were still shaken over the thing they swore had clung to the trunk. Me? I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that Hollow Creek Road felt more hostile than anywhere I'd ever been. I just wanted to put as much distance between us and that place as possible. When we finally stopped at a well-lit highway, nobody dared step out of the car. We just sat there, doors locked, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of how a harmless late-night drive had turned into something terrifying. I don't remember who spoke first, but they voiced what we were all thinking: we are never going back there. No one disagreed. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of that fog-choked road, those warped shadows playing over and over in my mind. I wasn't the only one. Our group kept texting each other at odd hours, sharing restless thoughts and half-formed theories. Some believed we had seen a wild animal. Others were convinced it was something far worse. Still, despite our fear, curiosity started gnawing at us. Were we really losing our minds? Was there something actually out there? Against our better judgment, we decided to return. Not for long, just enough to prove we weren't imagining things. We waited until midnight before heading back, this time in tense silence. As we neared Hollow Creek Road, the air in the car grew thick with nerves. Strangely, there was no fog this time. The road was eerily clear, as if nothing had ever happened. The driver slowed near the spot where things had gone wrong before, sweeping the headlights over the massive tree. Nothing seemed unusual. No sign of the shifting box. No sign of the clawed creature. But we still pulled over, keeping the engine running just in case. I stepped out, my skin crawling with the expectation that something would lunge from the dark. The air was crisp, unsettlingly quiet. I walked toward the tree, shining my flashlight up the trunk, searching for anything. Fur, footprints, anything to confirm our story. The bark had a few deep scratches, but for all I knew, they had been there for years. No strange footprints, no matted fur, just silence and a giant tree swaying in the light breeze. Still, standing there, I felt exposed, like unseen eyes were watching from the shadows. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, but I forced myself to scan the tree line, hoping for a sign. Nothing. Eventually, we decided to leave. As we got back into the car, the first real wave of paranoia hit. Were we being watched? The thought whispered through my mind. Maybe something was crouched behind the trees, silently observing us. We heard nothing, only our own unsteady breathing and the occasional shift of leaves. But that was enough. We left in a hurry, feeling foolish for coming back in the first place. Afterward, we drove around aimlessly, trying to shake the lingering fear. No one wanted to go home yet, so we parked in an empty lot, all of us wired and rattled. We shared stories we'd heard about Hollow Creek, tales of a hooded figure wandering the roadside, eerie cries drifting through the trees, monstrous shapes moving just out of sight. Some sounded ridiculous, but after what we had seen, I wasn't about to dismiss anything. For the next few nights, the dread clung to me like a shadow. Every time I turned out the lights, I imagined that thick fog creeping back, swallowing me whole. If a tree branch tapped against my window, I'd jolt awake, convinced something was trying to claw its way inside. My nightmares were the worst. Visions of being trapped alone on that road, a flashlight illuminating hollow, glowing eyes in the trees. Sometimes the thing would start climbing down toward me, and I'd wake up shaking. The others had similar dreams. Some saw the box-like shape looming over them. Others dreamed of distorted figures stalking the roadside. One friend swore they heard footsteps outside their bedroom window late at night. Another claimed to glimpse movement out of the corner of their eye whenever they thought about that drive. We didn't know if any of it was real or just paranoia creeping into our heads. Either way, it was seeping into our lives. I tried to move on, but every time I looked at a map and saw how close my house was to that cursed stretch of road, a pit formed in my stomach. Worse, rumors spread of others seeing things. Strange figures by the trees, wails in the night that sounded disturbingly human. Each new story kept our fear alive. I told myself I was done with that road, that I had no reason to go back. But deep down, part of me still wanted to know the truth. What was it about that place? Why did the fog come and go like a living thing? And what exactly had we seen? For now, none of us had the nerve to find out. Whether it was a creature, something supernatural, or just our minds playing tricks, we had learned our lesson. Whatever lurked out there in the dark, we wanted nothing to do with it. We stuck to well-lit streets, filled our days with normalcy, and clung to the hope that whatever haunted that road would stay far, far away. If it ever came looking for us, I wasn't sure we'd be ready to face it. I should have realized the night would be different the moment Jake pulled up in that rusty old car he'd borrowed from his cousin. Normally, we relied on beat-up bikes or just walked for our late-night meetups. But having a car suddenly made the night feel riskier. Jake's grin said it all. He was eager to push the limits, and Ethan and Ryan had that same look in their eyes. We piled in, the seats creaking under us, and my nerves tingled the second Jake turned the key. The headlights sliced through the darkness as we backed out of my driveway like we were on some undercover mission. No one mentioned a destination. We just drove, letting the empty roads take us wherever they led. I tried cracking some jokes, maybe teasing Jake about the weird noise coming from the engine, but my voice sounded forced. Deep down, I had this uneasy feeling that tonight had a different energy, something we hadn't felt before. The roads were eerily quiet, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the few cars we passed seemed in a hurry to disappear. Even the road signs, barely visible in the dim light, felt like they belonged to another time, forgotten and left to fade. Ethan leaned over from the back seat and muttered something about how cool it'd be to find an abandoned building or an old amusement park to explore. I nodded, but the silence in the car felt heavier than usual, wrapping around us each time we stopped talking. Eventually, Jake cursed under his breath and pointed at the gas gauge. We were running low. He promised to stop at the next station. We found one, a tiny, rundown place with a single buzzing fluorescent light. It looked like no one had cared for it in years, but it was our only option. We climbed out, stretching our stiff limbs, and I wandered a few steps from the car to check out the area. The air felt damp and stale, with an odd, earthy scent lingering. That's when I noticed a faded sign at the edge of the lot. The paint was peeling, but I could still make out the words, "Nature Reserve in Trance." A chill ran through me. Something about this place felt wrong. Ethan, on the other hand, was practically bouncing with excitement. He nudged Jake and Ryan, urging them to check it out. Jake, eyes gleaming with mischief, needed no convincing. Ryan shrugged, smirking, like he was game for anything as long as we didn't leave him behind. I watched them gather near a broken fence leading into the reserve. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I told them I wasn't sure, that maybe we should stick to safer places for once, but they just laughed and reassured me it would be quick, a shortcut that led straight to another gas station on the other side. I wanted to come up with a solid excuse, something that would keep us out of those trees, but all I managed was a weak protest before trailing after them. The closer we got to the tree line, the heavier the air felt. Jake's headlights briefly lit up the first few trunks, revealing a tangled mess of branches overhead. The shapes twisted unnaturally, making my stomach knot. I stopped. "Look, I'll meet you on the other side," I said, trying to sound casual, not terrified. The plan, if you could call it that, was for them to cut through the reserve while I walked around on the main road. They teased me, calling me the cautious one, but I could tell none of them were really laughing. Something about those woods put us all on edge. I stood there, watching their silhouettes vanish into the dark trees. That was the moment I knew we'd made a mistake. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to turn away and start walking. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves behind me, or maybe it was just my imagination. Either way, I walked faster. I had no idea what I'd find at the next gas station, but I knew one thing. I didn't trust those woods. Looking back, maybe that small sense of caution saved me from whatever was in there, but it also left me alone, pacing empty roads in the pitch black, my mind spinning endless possibilities. It was supposed to be a 30-minute walk, but it felt like hours. The streets were silent. No headlights, no distant sound of cars, just my footsteps crunching on gravel and my thoughts racing. Every few minutes, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the guys emerging from the woods. But no one came. When I finally saw the glow of the next gas station, my relief was brief. As soon as I stepped onto the cracked pavement, that same strange tension settled over me. Through the glass doors, I searched for any sign of my friends. The bored-looking clerk behind the counter barely glanced up before returning to his magazine. I lingered near the drink coolers, pretending to browse, but my nerves were unraveling. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Mark, Ryan, and Jake were nowhere. Maybe they went back to the car? Maybe something happened? My brain scrambled for logical explanations, but nothing sat right. Just as I was debating what to do, heavy footsteps echoed from outside. I spun around just as the three of them tore around the corner of the building. They looked awful, faces pale, drenched in sweat, eyes darting in every direction. Relief and fear clashed inside me. They were alive, but something had scared them half to death. We stumbled into the tiny seating area inside. No one spoke at first, they just stood there, gasping for breath. When I finally managed to ask what happened, Jake tried to talk but only shook his head, like words weren't enough. Ethan took a shaky breath and explained. Halfway through the path, they heard noises behind them, footsteps crunching in the leaves. At first, they thought it was an animal, but it was heavier, more deliberate. Then they saw it, a tall, pale figure standing in the trees. It was human-like, but not quite. Its limbs were too long, its eyes burning red in the darkness, locked onto them. I felt my stomach drop. The guys told ghost stories all the time, but they had never looked this shaken. Ryan added his part, describing the sounds of snapping branches, something huge moving fast, pursuing them. The moment they saw those eyes, instinct took over. They ran, blindly crashing through the forest, tripping, yelling, desperate to escape. When they finally reached the road, the thing didn't follow. Mark swore he turned back and saw it standing there at the edge of the trees, watching, testing. Then, just like that, it disappeared into the shadows. I wanted to believe they were messing with me, but the fear in their eyes was real. Ryan had tears in his, and Jake looked like he was about to pass out. They were done with the night's adventure. And honestly, so was I. We scrambled outside, scanning the dark tree line, afraid that thing would come back. Every shifting shadow looked like it was about to lunge at us. None of us dared blink. Finally, I broke the silence, urging us to get to the car. We ran. The road back to the vehicle felt endless, every step fueled by the desperate need to get as far away as possible. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, before finally unlocking the door. We piled in and slammed the doors shut, as if that thin layer of metal could keep us safe. No one spoke for the first mile. We just stared out the windows, watching the empty streets, the fields, the occasional flickering street lamp. Every shadow felt like it could be hiding something. By the time we reached our neighborhood, the sky was starting to lighten, but our fear hadn't faded. We barely muttered goodbyes before stumbling inside, each of us craving the safety of home. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that looming figure, heard my friends' frantic breaths. We had always thought we were fearless, just kids chasing a thrill. But that night had changed everything, because whatever was out there in those woods, it wasn't just a story. I woke up before sunrise, tossing my bag into the back seat of my dusty sedan and giving a groggy wave to my wife, who stood on the porch, still half asleep. We always exchanged a few words before I took off, though neither of us ever expected anything noteworthy to happen on my long drive across the barren stretch of desert. Once I got on the highway, I called her again to keep myself company and settled in for the ride, accepting the monotony of cracked pavement and faded lane markings. The sun rose gradually, casting a muted orange glow over the horizon. Everything outside my window felt unnervingly still, as if the desert itself were paying attention. My wife's voice crackled in and out, the reception faltering as I passed through dips in the terrain. Truthfully, I was barely focusing on our conversation, more absorbed in the shimmering asphalt ahead. A strange unease settled in my gut, though I couldn't put a finger on why. It was just a routine day, a normal drive, yet something about that morning felt off, like the land was cautioning me to stay alert. About an hour in, a motorcycle appeared in the distance. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, a lone rider navigating the road, skillfully weaving around tumbleweeds and dust drifts. He seemed too calm, too confident. The speed limit out here was already high, but he was pushing it even further, easily hitting between 70 and 90 miles per hour. My wife asked if something was wrong, probably noticing my distracted tone, and I muttered something vague about traffic. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Desert highways are unpredictable. Stretches of straight road can suddenly give way to sharp, dangerous curves. The signs warning of tight bends posted at 45 miles per hour were often ignored. Watching him approach one of the worst turns at such a reckless speed made my stomach knot. I told my wife to hold on a second. My focus locked onto the rider. He either didn't see the sign or didn't care. He didn't lean into the curve. He didn't slow down. In an instant, he vanished, one moment there, the next, gone beyond the edge of the road. Panic gripped me. A startled sound escaped my mouth, and my wife's voice spiked with concern, but I couldn't answer. My mind reeled, conjuring images of crumpled metal and broken limbs sprawled among the desert brush. I forced myself to hang up, likely leaving my wife more worried than before, and jerked the wheel to pull over. Gravel crunched beneath my tires. The sun was glaring into my eyes, my phone already in my hand, dialing 911 before I even realized it. That was when it hit me. I might have just witnessed something nobody ever wants to see. Over the dispatcher's voice, I heard my own breathing, harsh and uneven. I grabbed my first aid kit and stepped into the sweltering heat, my legs stiff like they wanted to lock up. I hesitated at the edge of the slope, bracing myself for a gruesome sight, knowing that whatever I found down there, I wouldn't walk away the same. I nearly dropped my phone as I scrambled down the incline, the dispatcher's voice fading in the background. My hands shook despite the oppressive heat, and every step sent loose rocks sliding underfoot. I expected to find the rider instantly, a lifeless shape crumpled at the bottom, but the embankment was steeper than it had seemed from the road. It felt like stepping into an unseen canyon, the kind of place where anything could be waiting. Still on the line, I fumbled out the details of the crash. Motorcycle going too fast, hit the curve straight on. The dry air caught in my throat, making it harder to speak. By the time I reached the bottom, I realized just how far he must have been thrown. Logic told me I'd find a tragedy, but when I rounded a boulder, I saw movement. A figure, young, mid-20s maybe, stumbling forward like he was trying to walk off a bad fall. Dust clung to his clothes, bits of dried brush snagged in the fabric. His helmet dangled from one hand, the visor cracked. He looked shaken, on the verge of collapsing. For a moment, I froze. Was I imagining this? Hold on. Stay still, I called, my voice unsteady. The dispatcher's questions blurred as I shoved my phone into my pocket, trusting them to hear what they could through the background noise. I hurried over, heart pounding, half expecting him to drop any second. Up close, he was scraped up, a gash on his forehead trailing blood down his face. His collarbone jutted out at an odd angle, definitely broken. And yet, he was still moving, even though every step must have been agony. I urged him to stop, to let me check him over. My gloved hands worked through a quick trauma assessment. No heavy bleeding, breathing rapid but steady. He mumbled something about losing control, his eyes darting around like he expected the ground to betray him again. I glanced toward the wreckage. His bike was destroyed. The front wheel twisted sharply, shattered debris scattered across the rocky floor. It didn't make sense that he was even alive, let alone standing. I remember thinking if he could survive something like that, maybe I needed to respect this desert more than I did. Maybe trust it a little more. Either way, I kept talking to him, kept him conscious while the dispatcher reminded me to stay put for emergency responders. Within minutes, sirens howled in the distance, growing closer. I guided the rider toward a more stable patch of ground, careful not to jostle his shoulder. Dust swirled around us as the paramedics arrived, their boots kicking up grit that stung my eyes. Their expressions shifted from urgent focus to sheer disbelief when they saw him, not only alive but standing. They braced his neck, secured him to a stretcher, and carried him back up toward the ambulance. I followed, adrenaline still coursing through me, replaying the moment he had flown off the road. I explained everything to the EMTs, his speed, how he hadn't even attempted to turn. They nodded, probably used to seeing drivers underestimate these roads. One of them looked at me and said, "He's lucky you were right behind him." But luck didn't explain what I felt. Relief, yes, but also a lingering dread, like I had just stumbled into a story with an ending I'd never seen coming. When the ambulance pulled away, sirens fading into the distance, the eerie stillness of the desert returned. I stood there, staring at the scattered wreckage, trying to process what had just happened. My sedan waited up on the road, looking small against the vast emptiness. The whole scene felt like a reminder of how quickly life can turn. One minute, you're cruising along, just another driver on an open road. The next, you're standing over the wreckage of someone who should be dead, but somehow isn't. I climbed back up the slope, every step exhausting. By the time I reached my car, my phone was ringing. My wife, frantic, wondering why I had cut out mid-sentence. I answered, my voice raw. There was nothing supernatural about what had happened, and yet, it unsettled me more than any ghost story ever could. All I could think about was how close that rider had come to dying, how fast a normal day had turned into something out of a nightmare. And even with him safely in an ambulance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the desert was watching, waiting. I slid behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The engine's hum felt too ordinary after everything. Pulling back onto the road, I told my wife I'd explain later. Once I understood it myself, the highway stretched ahead, unchanged, yet somehow different. Every turn felt sharper, more treacherous. I gripped the wheel tighter. Nothing around me had shifted, but I had, and I knew I'd never see that lonely stretch of desert the same way again. I'd been behind the wheel for what felt like an eternity, chasing the horizon in a half-dazed state. The clock on the dashboard taunted me. 3:48 a.m., then 3:49, each minute dragging itself through my nerves. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dark and empty, while the cold snuck in through every crack of my aging Ford. More than once, I considered pulling over to rest, but every time I glanced at the fuel gauge, the needle dipped closer to empty. So I kept going. When I finally spotted lights in the distance, relief washed over me until I got close enough to see what I was actually dealing with. It wasn't a busy rest stop, not even a well-lit convenience store. Instead, a lone, flickering street lamp illuminated a small, run-down gas station that looked like it had been left behind in another decade. The paint peeled from its walls, and the windows of the nearby shops were either boarded up or covered in grime so thick you couldn't see inside. It reminded me of a set from some low-budget horror movie, eerily still, unsettlingly quiet, and way too inviting for trouble. I stepped out of my truck, the biting air making me wince. My breath hovered in front of me for a brief moment before vanishing into the cold. The silence around me was so deep that even the smallest movement felt amplified. The gas pump let out a dull hum as I slid my card, trying to ignore just how dark everything was beyond that lone pool of flickering light. No other cars passed by. The whole place felt deserted, like I'd stepped into a forgotten pocket of the world. Then I saw it, the silhouette of a sleek black car at the far end of the building, almost swallowed by the shadows. I hadn't noticed it at first, probably because its tinted windows and dark paint job were practically designed to disappear into the night. Standing around it were four guys who looked like they belonged anywhere but this desolate pit stop. Ink covered their arms, stretching across most of their exposed skin. They wore shorts, tank tops, and high socks, like the freezing air didn't touch them at all. The silence grew heavier as I realized they weren't talking, weren't moving around. They just stood there, leaning against the car, watching me fill my tank. My heart tried to lunge into my throat, but I forced myself to act normal, keeping my attention locked on the pump like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. The neon light above buzzed and flickered, occasionally casting sudden brightness over them, making their tattoos shine. I wasn't sure if they'd been waiting for me to notice them or if this was just an unlucky coincidence, but the moment felt thick with tension. Their eyes, though hard to see in the dim light, seemed locked onto me, and there was nothing friendly in them. Then they moved, not in a rush, not like they were in a hurry, but slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. That's when it really hit me just how alone I was. No cashier inside. No travelers rolling in with headlights cutting through the dark. Just me, my sputtering truck, and a half-lit station in the middle of nowhere. My mind raced. Should I greet them casually? Act like nothing was off? Or should I just get the hell out of there? My gut made the choice for me. I yanked the nozzle free, spilling a bit of gas in my rush, and practically launched myself into the driver's seat. My engine hesitated for a split second before roaring to life. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stepping closer, their silhouettes growing larger. The overhead light flickered again, making their figures appear and vanish in eerie flashes. Whatever they wanted, I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Gripping the wheel, I slammed my foot onto the gas. The tires skidded briefly before catching traction, and my truck lurched forward. As I pulled onto the road, I couldn't help but glance back. They were still there, standing just a few steps from where I had been, and I swore I caught a glint in one of their eyes under that dying light. My breath came fast and uneven as I sped away, watching the gas station shrink in my mirrors. Part of me felt ridiculous for panicking. Maybe they were just harmless guys passing time. But something about the way they'd moved, the way they'd watched, told me otherwise. The whole place, what little of it existed, disappeared behind me, and I silently promised myself I wouldn't stop again until I found somewhere well-lit and crowded. Little did I know, my nerves were about to get tested all over again. I hadn't even put much distance between myself and that eerie gas station when I caught the glow of headlights in the rearview mirror. A sharp beam of white cutting through the night. A part of me wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, that maybe they were simply heading in the same direction. But everything in my gut told me this wasn't normal. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as the lights grew brighter, closing the gap faster than I liked. My truck shuddered as I floored it, the engine growling in protest. The cold air howled through the cracked windows, whipping around me. My tires screeched as I veered onto the main highway. In my mirrors, that low-slung car cut through the darkness like a hunter locking onto its prey. For the first mile, they stayed glued to my tail, their headlights glaring against my battered tailgate. I prayed to see another car, any car, or a trucker finishing a long haul. But the road was as empty as a graveyard. Just me and those relentless lights behind me. They must have thought my truck was too old, too slow. Poor assumption. Beneath the worn exterior, I had a modified engine built for performance. I had never expected to rely on it like this, but here I was. Every time they edged closer, I pressed the pedal harder. The truck responded, roaring forward, its deep rumble matching my pounding heart. Mile markers blurred past, unreadable at this speed. Then, finally, the distance between us stretched. Their headlights shrank, growing smaller and smaller until they were just specks. My mind raced, expecting them to pull some trick, cut onto a back road, loop ahead to block me in. But after a few more tense minutes, their lights vanished completely. I kept my foot on the gas far longer than necessary, every nerve still wound tight. When I finally eased off, the truck let out a weary cough, like even it was feeling the stress. I pulled onto the shoulder for a moment, staring hard into the rearview mirror. Nothing, just darkness. A shaky laugh escaped me, though it didn't sound right. Not relief, not triumph, just pure, unfiltered unease. I didn't tell anyone about it until I reached the next town that morning. After finding a cheap, scalding cup of coffee, I spilled the whole story to a friend of mine, who happened to be a local cop. He listened, hardly blinking. When I reached the part about the black car and its passengers, his expression turned grim. He told me that stretch of highway was known for cartel activity, used to avoid main interstate patrols. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. My skin crawled as everything clicked. The tattoos, the silent confidence. Maybe they had just been looking for an easy target. Maybe they had plans for my truck. Who knew? My friend shrugged and said I was lucky. One of those times you outrun trouble before it pulls you into something you can't escape. Lucky. I wasn't sure that's what I'd call it, because the memory of that flickering gas station, of those unreadable eyes watching me in the dark, was burned into my mind. And I knew one thing for certain: if I ever see another lonely station like that again, I won't be stopping. Some lessons come wrapped in fear. This one taught me that in the middle of nowhere, anything can happen, and it usually does when you least expect it. That morning, I woke up feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease, thinking the trip to Dalvin and Barona Park would go off without a hitch. My cousins and I squeezed into the back of my uncle's large SUV, arguing playfully over who would get the best window seat. We had snacks, music, and an endless supply of naive optimism. If I had known what was ahead, I might have just stayed in bed. The GPS was the first issue, though I didn't realize it at the time. We were completely confident that the fancy app would guide us flawlessly. My uncle, who was usually a cautious driver, put full trust in that electronic voice directing our turns. The day had started clear, the sky so bright that it almost stung my eyes when I looked outside. Everything felt perfect until we left the well-traveled main highway. We found ourselves on a narrow road winding through dense trees. At first, it felt like an adventure, like we were uncovering a secret route. My mom, sitting up front, leaned forward to double-check the map on her phone. She murmured something under her breath, her expression tightening as she urged my uncle to slow down. The sunlight was slipping away, painting everything in shades of orange. It gave me the eerie feeling that we were running out of time, that we needed to find our way before darkness swallowed us. The SUV's tires crunched on gravel as the road beneath us grew more treacherous. One side of the path was a steep rocky drop, while the other was a thick wall of trees. My stomach twisted each time the car swayed even slightly. Eventually, the weight of tension made my eyelids heavy, and I started drifting off in my seat, trying to shut out the unease. Suddenly, my mom's voice cut through the air, sharper than before. She warned my uncle again to be careful. Peeking outside, I realized the road had become frighteningly narrow, as if we were following a thin thread of land suspended over nothingness. My cousins, who had been laughing just an hour ago, sat frozen. One clutched the seat in front of him as if that would somehow keep us from going over the edge. The atmosphere inside the SUV felt suffocating. The trees pressed in around us, almost like they didn't want us there. My uncle, ever the joker, tried to lighten the mood with a comment about how thrilling this was, but no one even attempted to laugh. We just wanted this part of the journey to end. The car crawled forward, inch by inch, our headlights casting eerie shapes in the thickening dusk. Shadows stretched unnaturally, making the branches resemble skeletal fingers reaching for us. Then, up ahead, I saw it, a slightly wider patch of dirt where we might be able to turn around. Relief flickered inside me, but I stayed tense. My uncle slowly edged forward, trying to maneuver the vehicle in the tight space. As the tires shifted, small rocks tumbled into the abyss below. This was the moment we had all been dreading. Could we turn around without tipping over? Every move felt delicate, like one wrong turn could send us over the edge. My heart pounded as my uncle adjusted the wheel in tiny increments. The side mirror nearly scraped a jutting rock wall, while the other side of the SUV seemed to hover over emptiness. My mom guided him, watching the tires carefully. When we finally completed the three-point turn and the nose of the car faced downhill again, I realized I had been holding my breath. My mom exhaled shakily, my cousin let out a deep sigh, and even my uncle, always the confident driver, gave a nervous grin. The way back felt safer, at least compared to what we had just gone through. My uncle picked up speed slightly, and for a moment, I let myself hope that the worst was behind us. My mom kept glancing out the window, whispering that we had made the right call to turn back. I remember thinking that nothing could be more terrifying than that narrow road, that we would never trust a navigation app again. But a small voice in my head warned me that we weren't out of danger yet. The sky darkened faster than I expected, and we still had hours of driving ahead, hours that would test us in ways we weren't ready for. My family tried to act normal, but the tension in the car felt like static clinging to our skin. I stared out the window, searching for signs of civilization as the last streaks of daylight faded. We had been on the road longer than planned, but my uncle was determined to find another route to Dalvin and Barona Park. The earlier scare still clung to me, making every passing minute feel heavier. The GPS had failed us, so my uncle relied on memory, convinced that he had driven these back roads before. There were no streetlights out here, only our headlights cutting through endless trees. The night was impossibly dark, like a thick curtain we couldn't pull back. When I looked out the window, all I saw was our own anxious reflections staring back at me. My mom murmured about pulling over and waiting for sunrise, but my uncle refused. He was sure the main road was just ahead. The terrain grew rougher, the tires crunching over loose gravel. Everyone in the SUV braced themselves against the bumps. The tension was thick enough to taste. Then the car rolled to a stop. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, or rather, the spot where it simply ended. As if some unseen force had torn it away, leaving nothing but darkness beyond. My uncle turned off the engine, muttering that something wasn't right. Outside, the silence pressed against us. My mom urged him to step out and check if there was a hidden turn we had missed. When he opened the door, a blast of cold, damp air rushed inside. It smelled earthy, like the ground itself was swallowing us. I leaned forward, trying to see where he had gone, but the darkness consumed him. We held our breath, waiting. Then, his silhouette reappeared in the headlights, his face tense. There was no way forward. And then I saw them. A row of figures stood just beyond the tree line. First, I thought it was my imagination. But no, they were there. Multiple figures, standing motionless, too still. My mom whispered, asking who they could be. No one had an answer. These strangers didn't call out for help. They didn't move at all. They just watched. My uncle hesitated, gripping the steering wheel like he was deciding whether to honk or call out. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The few seconds he spent frozen in indecision stretched into eternity. Then, finally, he put the car in reverse. As our headlights panned away, those people, if they were even people, remained still. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke, the car sounded different. We were on paved road again. City lights glowed in the distance. A 24-hour convenience store appeared, and my uncle pulled into the parking lot without hesitation. The neon sign cast an artificial glow over the asphalt, grounding us back in reality. We stumbled inside, shaking off the night's fear. My cousins grabbed food, my mom checked her phone, and my uncle muttered about never taking that old route again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left something unfinished. A part of me stayed behind in those woods, haunted by the silent watchers. I learned something that night. Not every road on a map is meant to be traveled. Some paths belong to something else. And maybe, just maybe, we had been smart to leave when we did. But a question still lingers in my mind. What would have happened if we had stayed just a little longer? I had driven this route through Georgia more times than I could count, but that night, something about it felt wrong. My husband dozed in the seat beside me, leaving me alone with the endless dark, the rhythmic swish of the wipers, and the unrelenting curves of the highway. A fine mist covered the windshield, and thick patches of fog forced me to lean forward as if that would help me see through it. There was something about the air that set me on edge. It wasn't just the weather, though that was bad enough. The winding roads were slick, the visibility low. But what unsettled me most was the eerie stillness. There wasn't another car in sight. Each time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I half hoped to see headlights behind us, some sign that we weren't the only ones out here. But there was nothing, just mile after mile of empty road. Every so often, the fog would thin, revealing towering trees leaning inward from both sides, their dripping branches forming a tunnel. The occasional reflective road sign reminded me we were still on a state highway, but without them, I might have believed we'd somehow drifted onto some abandoned back road. The low hum of static from the radio only made things worse. Each pop and hiss felt like a whisper, as if something unseen was just beyond my field of vision. I didn't want to wake my husband. He was exhausted, and there was no need for both of us to suffer through the drive. Still, a part of me wanted to shake him awake and say, "Something's not right," but I kept quiet, gripping the wheel and taking shallow breaths. Then, as I rounded a particularly sharp curve, the trees pressed in close. My headlights barely reached beyond a few feet, leaving the rest swallowed in blackness. And then I saw movement. Off to the left, maybe 20 feet away, something enormous stepped away from the trees. At first, my mind refused to process it. It was as if a whole section of the forest had detached itself and begun to move. A bolt of fear shot through me, and I clenched the steering wheel until my fingers ached. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe it was the fog playing tricks. Maybe a tree branch swayed just right. But it was massive, taller than any living thing should be. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it melted back into the dark. 1 second it was there. The next, it was gone. I wanted to slam on the brakes to get a better look, but the wet road made that too dangerous. And stopping on such an isolated stretch with nowhere to pull over, that felt even worse. For a few seconds, I questioned what I had seen. Had my tired eyes imagined it? Had the gloom twisted an ordinary tree into something monstrous? But deep down, I knew. I had seen it move, not sway in the wind, not shift like mist. It had stepped back the way a person might disappear behind a wall. Only this thing was the size of a 3-story building. Maybe bigger. That wasn't normal. Up ahead, a dimly flickering motel sign broke through the darkness. It looked like a beacon of safety, a reminder that civilization still existed. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But just as quickly, doubt crept back in. I had seen it move. I thought about stopping at that motel, but it looked abandoned. A handful of dark windows, no signs of life. It didn't feel any safer than the open road. So I pressed on. My husband stirred, muttered something about the rain, then drifted back into light sleep. I envied him. I wished I could dismiss this creeping dread. The road twisted beneath dripping branches, and my eyes kept flicking to the trees, half expecting to see that shape again. At last, a rundown diner came into view, its parking lot wide enough to pull over. I did, if only to catch my breath. My husband blinked awake and asked if everything was all right. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, I saw something, but the words refused to come. Instead, I stared at the diner's shadowed overhang, expecting that enormous figure to emerge at any moment. We didn't stay long. Back on the road, I forced myself to focus on the asphalt ahead. Time stretched and warped, every minute feeling endless. The air remained thick with unease, pressing against me. I kept glancing in the mirror, convinced that if I looked long enough, I'd see something impossibly tall lurking in the distance. Finally, the road straightened, and the forest gave way to open land. The weight on my chest eased, though not completely. My mind replayed the sight over and over, questioning, doubting. Had I really seen something? Was it just a trick of the light? But no matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, I kept coming back to the way it had vanished. Then, at last, a road sign announced we were nearing the state line. I exhaled, hoping that once we crossed into South Carolina, the night would lose its menace. Maybe I could convince myself it was all in my head, but I knew better. We pulled into a truck stop just before midnight, drawn to its flickering neon glow. Rain drummed against the roof as I parked under the dim glow of a street lamp. My husband, now fully awake, watched me with concern. I still hadn't told him what I saw. How could I? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Despite my hesitation, we climbed out, stretching our legs. The air smelled of damp pavement and diesel. Inside, I bought a coffee and, on a whim, searched my phone. I hesitated before typing words like huge tree creature or Georgia cryptid. The results were vague old myths, rumors about odd things in the woods. Nothing concrete. When we returned to the car, the lone station attendant, an older man, gave me a knowing look. When I muttered something about the road feeling empty tonight, he just shrugged, his gaze flickering toward the highway. This time of year, some folks say they see things. Then, as if realizing he'd said too much, he clammed up. Back on the highway, the fog returned thicker than before, swallowing the road in eerie silence. Just when I thought I could shake the feeling of being watched, I saw it again. Another fleeting glimpse at the tree line, a warped, too tall shape shifting back into the shadows. My breath caught. My husband noticed my tension and asked what was wrong. I wanted to tell him, but the words felt absurd. Instead, I pressed the gas, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. Mile by mile, the road stretched on. Then, finally, the South Carolina border sign. Civilization returned in bits and pieces. Streetlights, homes, signs of normalcy. But the image of that towering figure lingered in my mind. Even as we pulled into my family's driveway, even as the warmth of home tried to comfort me, I couldn't shake it. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat by the window, staring out at the trees, hoping that morning would erase my fear. But deep down, I knew, some things don't stay behind. Some things watch and wait.